And good morning. This is Eric Rollins, the Constitutionalist, here on 1550 KXEX, the best talk in town. We are currently sitting right here at the studio in Fresno. So I hope you're enjoying this California weather. We've got a little change up, a little rain. Not my favorite thing, but man, we sure need it. And the farmers need every drop we can get. So this is a blessing, and we need to remember that that's a blessing. So here we are, first show of 2023. Or I could just get it wrong like our president. But we're going to go ahead and go with 2023. But, his latest comments just blow me away. Talking about patches on his pants and how he'd been to 133 countries. And that all those 133 countries were just like patches on the pants. Now, not only does it not make a whole lot of sense, but potentially he was just dissing all of those countries that he claimed he went to. Now, I don't think he knows where he is very often. It's almost like if they don't have something for him to read, whatever word pops in his head, that one comes out, and then another one comes out, and there's no filter. So I don't know what to make of that, but when you look at Sky News, when you look at a lot of news out of India, when you look at BBC, they're not covering for him. They're making fun of him. He has become the butt of jokes around the world. Now, I'm glad we're able to help out other countries in getting a good laugh because, well, we got Jibbers for president. But Jibbers was at least smart enough to get the cackling hyena as his backup. And so, when you start comparing the two, it's hard to say which one's better, cackles or Jibbers. Nonetheless, we've got some things going on that I think are important to our democracy. I'm going to disagree a little bit with one of the hosts here, Alan Autry. He thinks it's absolutely embarrassing and terrible that the speakership has not been decided yet. I'm more in Glenn Beck, Dan Bongino's kind of in agreement with them, and not in agreement with some of the big names like Sean Hannity, Mark Levin. They think that all of this should have been decided beforehand. What I want to point out is that Kevin McCarthy, currently saying the right things, is a younger, more attractive Mitch McConnell, meaning he is a product of the system. He doesn't care about principles. He cares about policy. Power. Doesn't care about policy. He cares about power. He might somewhat care, but power is number one. So they got some major concessions out of him. We're about noon, so in an hour or so, I don't know if it's Eastern time or West or Pacific time, but they said noon. I have to assume it's probably Eastern time, which means maybe right about now, but I'm on the radio, so I'm not going to get that news. They will have vote number 7. The conservative group, largely led by Marjorie Taylor Greene, Matt Gaetz, they've got some concessions. So they got seats on the Rules Committee. Conservatives did. That's a big deal because the way Congress works, everything goes through the Rules Committee. So that's important. They got McCarthy to concede that one vote could start the vacating of the chair, meaning if somebody really thought he was doing a terrible job, they could call for a vote. Now, if it's one person, obviously it's not going to go anywhere. They're going to call for the vote. They're going to have the vote. It's going to be done. It does weaken the speaker, but do we want somebody that we dread like Nancy Pelosi? It would almost be fair to say I think Kevin McCarthy's much better on positions, but he's also just a more attractive Nancy Pelosi. Doesn't have quite her hemline. Is certainly more articulate. Has better haircut than Nancy. But, we don't want that again. We don't want somebody from the swamp. So we want to force him to be a little more reasonable. Another compromise, another concession that the conservative group that is holding up Kevin McCarthy's speakership is they got a promise of no interference in primaries. So Kevin McCarthy controls a fund as the Speaker of the House that it's kind of like a PAC. It's a fund that has a tremendous amount of money, and they use that money to elect candidates. Well, typically, they interfere and they pick the establishment candidate, the one they know. And so first-time candidates, actually conservative candidates, have a much harder time because they can't get the funding, largely because that group interferes. Well, they got a promise of not interfering. But there's three things they still want. Now, if they stop at these three things, then I think that's a pretty good victory. And this can't go on forever. But we're only 3 days in. And the idea that, oh, it's embarrassing and the sky is falling, well, democracy's messy. And I don't know that I want a bunch of backroom deals that decide it, because that's what would have happened if they did not make this public. I love transparency. So I see this as a win, not only for conservatives, but a win for transparency in government. The three things they still would like. They would like a border bill. Now, whether that bill passes or not, to come before Congress and to force people to vote on it, the conservative group wants that bill kind of designed after the Texas plan. I don't know the details of this plan, but I'm sure you can look that up pretty easily. They want a vote, and you realize that the chair determines whether something even comes to a vote. It's not like some random member goes, hey, I want to do this. The chair can just shut them down. They want a balanced budget amendment. Now, again, it might not pass, but they want the chair to bring forward legislation and make people take a stand to show us whether they actually believe in the balanced budget or not. The third thing, term limits. I'm kind of a little torn on term limits because it seems to me that true freedom, you should be able to run as many times as you want and people should just get rid of you. At the same time, I'm aware that Nancy Pelosi was in Congress about as long as I've been alive. A little longer. That's a scary thought because I'm no longer a young man. More than 50 years. Jibbers, Joe Biden. Gibberin' Joe. He's been in like 60 years. It's time for him to go. So, term limits with the president is limited to 2 terms. Maybe it's not so bad for Congress. Maybe I'm wrong on my take and that term limits should happen. We've got to do something that makes politicians advocates for their constituents rather than products of the swamp, where they're more beholden to their large donors and to the political process and to holding on to that power than they are to doing the right thing. Now, here's a place where I'll agree with Alan. The right thing often goes across party, but we're so concerned with party and perception, we let that go. Like, well, that's a Democrat idea or that's a Republican idea. I can't vote for that. Do the right thing for the people. It's not always about party. Sometimes it's simply the right thing. And so term limits might allow that to happen. It might get rid of some of the bad people. They'd have to process through and move on. They were in the House to the Senate. They were in the Senate. They got to either run for president or get out. Sounds like a good thing to me. There's also one other big breaking news thing that doesn't surprise me. It is just another aspect of, what are we on, dump number 12 of the Twitter files? We've got the bug-eyed, lying, dishonest California congressman that reached out as a member of the Rules Committee and told Twitter, you need to censor people. So the government, in another place, actually reached out. Now, this isn't a big shock because the Biden election team also reached out to Twitter. So, no shock. Now, the Trump team also reached out to Twitter. I want to point out that, this censorship problem that absolutely violates the First Amendment when the government gets involved. It's something that it's a swamp problem. as opposed to just one party. Now, who's been in charge of the swamp for quite some time? Doesn't mean the Republicans don't have some blame. But, this last omnibus bill that got passed through, it was a private meeting with the turtle, Mitch McConnell, Gibber and Joe. You know that McCarthy had to be part of it. I think he wanted some concessions and wanted more power, so he wanted it to happen with the new Congress rather than just before the end of the year. Would he have done better for us? Hope so. Look, Kevin McCarthy lives just down from here when he's not in the swamp. He's living in Bakersfield. I don't know exactly where, but living in Bakersfield. Anyway, so all of those things kind of come together for me, and I kind of wanted to talk about how the woke culture and they're almost praying to a new religion, whether that religion is climate change or that religion is the government. I would say they're hand in hand. And in order for that to happen, there's authoritarian. You have to be authoritarian. Now, why in the world would any sane individual want to give up so much power? Well, they're going to say, well, for equity. Liberals generally move from a place of compassion. I'll give them that. Now, there's where they're starting. I don't believe that a whole lot of their policies actually result in compassion. I believe that they result in tyranny, or tyranny of low expectations, for instance, welfare, rather than a workfare type plan where people have meaning. So in today's world, if you don't have any hope, and this is not a new thing, nihilism, the idea that you're going through and there's just no meaning to life, and because of that you have no hope. You hear a lot of that, especially with the younger generation, especially because in colleges, all they do is focus on how this is a horrible country, and they never educate you on any of the amazing things about this country. It's all bad. We got to tear it down. So they're kind of involved in this group think. They become an echo chamber. That's what happened on Twitter when only one side was allowed to speak. That there was this echo chamber. Now this then resulted in woke politicians. Because politics is just downstream from culture. And if culture is all concerned with regulating what you can say, all concerned with deciding because of the color of your skin whether you're a good or a bad person, ignoring your actions. Woke culture is all about LGBTQ and redefining what your sexuality is. Biology no longer exists, apparently. Though I would like to ask all those people that truly believe you can just change whatever. If you have a pet at home, you think of it as male or female? Just because we have a more advanced brain than our pets, does that mean that we're no longer male or female if we chose to have chemicals and surgery? I think it doesn't change who you are. Now, that's entirely different from sleep with who you want, dress in what clothes you want, but don't make me pretend. That's the biggest thing. Don't make me pretend. So we've got this whole society that I think is often depressed. They see there's no meaning. And one of the ways they find that meaning is, oh, well, okay, if I'm not going to believe in God, I'm going to believe in the government or climate change or Mother Earth. And they're simply substituting those. Now, I think they're kind of false. If you are substituting the government and you're willing to give up your free speech, you're willing to give up your personal autonomy, because in authoritarian countries, that's what happens. But I want to point out that most of the people when Hitler came to power were cheering for Hitler because he offered them hope, and then they didn't have to think. Most of the people, when the communists rose to power, again, they had a different vision. Hitler's was on the one race, and then the others that were of an inferior race. So creating the super race and telling the German people that they were the greatest thing ever. And most people bought into it. And if you believe that you're one of those people that would have stood against it, I hope you're right. But the vast majority of the people in Germany did not stand against it. You could look at the Soviet Union. Again, largely that new government came forward to the cheers of the people. And with those cheers, with that approval, they then took control of the life. Now, in the Soviet Union, it was for the greater good, or the group rather than the individual. But in order for that to work, and by the way, it's never ever worked, so cultural Marxists that want it here in the US, no wonder you want to hide and destroy history, because if you did, you'd have to look at how communism murders people. Just like the Nazis murdered people. No, they started from a different point, but if the political spectrum's almost a circle, some people will say it's a horseshoe. I think those 2 points of the horseshoe, if it's pointing upward, almost touch. There's not much difference in what happened. All your rights disappeared. I get that. All your rights disappeared. We're going to go ahead and play a quote from the Academy of Ideas. Love this quote. Love the Academy of Ideas. You can find them on YouTube. They also have a website. It is an intellectual way to look at history and to talk about freedom. And I would encourage you to go check them out. We're going to go ahead and play that clip.
The great citizens of a country are not those who bend the knee before authority, but rather those who, against authority if need be, are adamant as to the honor and freedom of that country. Instead of respect for reason, open dialogue, freedom of speech, and individual and property rights, political systems across the world are becoming increasingly authoritarian.
Yep.
Deceptions and lies, manipulation and propaganda, fear-mongering and psychological operations are all being used to justify political actions and policies that destroy life. How do politicians continue to convince the public to do away with their freedoms in favor of heavy-handed government control? Why are so few people defending liberty when a world absent of it is a world of mass suffering? In this video, we are going to examine these questions. If freedom is regressing today throughout such a large part of the world, wrote Albert Camus, this is probably because the devices for enslavement have never been so cynically chosen or so effective, but also because her real defenders, through fatigue, through despair, or through a false idea of strategy and efficiency, have turned away from her. It is often said that one cannot solve a problem if one is not even cognizant of it, and herein lies one of the reasons freedom is retreating so rapidly from our world. Many people still believe themselves to be free, and as Goethe wrote, none are more hopelessly enslaved than those who falsely believe they are free. Those who believe themselves to be free disregard the fact that to be governed in the modern world is to be watched, inspected, spied upon, directed, law-driven, numbered, regulated, enrolled, indoctrinated, preached at, controlled, checked, estimated, valued, censored, and commanded by beings who have neither the right, nor the wisdom, nor the virtue to do so. Accepting our lack of freedom is a necessary step to counteract this undesirable condition.
So I don't want to say there's no hope. In this country, we have something called the Constitution that lays down our rights, but we have to embrace those rights. We have to exercise those rights. How many people do you know that are afraid to speak about politics and where you stand about values, about morals? When you got together, we just had a season of getting together between Thanksgiving and Christmas where you're supposed to see family and friends. Did you have any real discussions, or did you hide from all those real discussions? I think we need to have real discussions. Now, you should be nice to your relatives. Maybe you shouldn't actually pick a fight. I'm not saying that, but you could start with asking them, well, what did you think about how they locked us all down? And hear what they have to say. Start a discussion. What do you think about high gas prices? That is absolutely a result of government policy, both limiting our oil and limiting the possibility that you can be independent, or we as a country can be independent with our energy. We're going to go ahead and take a break. This is Eric Rollins, the Constitutionalist, here on 1550 KXEX, the best talk in town. So when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about this whole woke idea and collectivism versus the individual. Let's go ahead and come back. This is Eric Rollins, the Constitutionalist, here on 1550 KXEX, the best talk in town. Today we are talking about woke culture, how politics is just downstream of that. And there's a lot of cultural Marxists and a lot of people that say, oh, I'm for socialism. And then their shining example of socialism is those Nordic countries like Sweden. I want to point out that if you talk to the Swedish people, you listen to interviews of their politicians, they say, we have socialist policies, but we still believe in the individual. Thus, it's not true socialism. It is kind of a socialism democracy blend, where the individual still matters. In true socialism, it's all about the group. Think about that. So, if it's all about the group, then if the good of the group is what's decided, and the government is the one, obviously, who decides what the good of the group is, then what happens to the minority opinion? Or the minority person? Do they still have rights? Not in communism. You know, they talk about communism and how the state withers away, but the practical reality is, whether we're talking about the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, who killed millions of people, or China, where the Communist Party killed millions and millions of people, or Russia, where they killed millions of people, or Venezuela, where they killed millions of people. Yet, you know, those are just all inconvenient facts to the cultural Marxists, because they say, well, you know, the wrong people were in charge and now we're more enlightened. Really? Life's hard. People have real problems. Often things are dark. Life isn't easy. And I would say some examples of why it isn't easy. If it was easy and everything was about happiness, then why would so many people be in the Western world be on drugs? Because we don't have a sense of purpose. It's because we don't have a morality. And I believe that religion is one of those things that provides the morality. And it allows you to work towards a purpose, something greater than yourself. Now, I think those are necessary things. But if you substitute the government for religion, or you substitute Mother Earth, and you pray to climate change, then you got a justification to do whatever it is you need to get your way. Except it's no longer you deciding, it's the government deciding, the elites that decide. And I want to point out that every government system so far has elites. I think that we're a little closer because it's easier for us to get rid of our elites. I say it's easy. I said it's easier than in most other forms of government. Unless the Communist Party decides that the current leader of the Communist Party needs to go, in other words, the other leaders decide he needs to go, it doesn't matter what the people think. Nothing's changing. And that current leader, he was willing, because he's got a zero COVID policy, to lock people into their apartment building and then weld the door shut. Think about that. Locked them up like they're in prison, welded the door shut. Hopefully they had enough food and water. Now, what happened was that there was a fire and a bunch of people died. Tragic. Because of his zero COVID policy. Nothing reasonable about it. I want to point out that this country also has ridiculous COVID policies. Flip-flop Fauci, who told us wear masks, don't wear masks. The vaccine or the jab was 95% effective in preventing transmission, so you wouldn't spread it to somebody else if you got jabbed. And then you watch and you find this video. I love this video where he's down to 70%. Well, it's mostly effective and will stop the worst symptoms if you get COVID. There's where it stops. Well, that sure isn't you have to get the jab. It certainly isn't. He is advocating for children to get the jab when they're not vulnerable. If they get the jab and then that's not going to stop them from spreading it. What's the point? You essentially denied natural immunity, which is the history of man. Now I'm getting sidetracked on that one. I think there's a lot of moral decay in this country. And I think that the woke have they're a symptom of it. So the woke doesn't just include a group of individuals that post things online. Again, it includes some politicians, but it also includes a willing media. And we saw that with the Twitter files. As you look at those releases, as you look at the fact that Fox News is covering it, independent podcasters are talking about what's happening and how these are absolute violations of First Amendment. But ABC, NBC, fake news, CNN, etc. All of that legacy media, they're ignoring the story. Yet they're increasingly shrill when it suits their narrative. They're increasingly negative when it suits their narrative. I think that's largely because they're dying. And what we're hearing is the little fit that they're having as they're bleeding money, as they're having to let people go. And they want attention because they're like, well, but we're the important ones. Wait, we're the important ones. We're going to tell you what to think. And they've forgotten that, well, say for instance, this show. I have a perspective. I don't lie to you about the perspective. I am straight up with you. I am on the right. That's where you're hearing my news from. But that doesn't change some of the facts that I bring to you. The take that I have, the interpretation and then of those facts will be generally conservative. The media has this left bias, and they're supporting woke culture. For instance, they're willing to say, oh, there's no CRT. Well, it's not in schools. Yet, CRT is largely an idea. They don't write down that this is CRT. What they do is they take the CRT's worldview. I'm not going to be able to pronounce that word. We're going to go with worldview. And so that worldview is you're either a victim or you're an oppressor, because they see every relationship as one of power. And you're either the powerful person or you're the oppressed person. Now, how reasonable is that? So that means that from their perspective, all hierarchies are bad. Oh, except the one they want. Now, what does this have to do with a hierarchy? Well, in order to have an effective society, regardless of what form of government, you have to have a hierarchy. So if we're talking about somebody that's totalitarian, let's take China. You've got the average person who takes whatever they can get, whatever little freedom. You don't have any freedom of speech. You don't have the right to bear arms. You wouldn't have any Third Amendment that allows the government, or in the U.S. stops the government from quartering soldiers in your house. The government can do whatever it wants, and if you complain, you disappear. Then you've got people that are part of the Communist Party, because people will find a way. And then you've got the upper echelon of the Communist Party, the supreme leader, that only gets elected by the Communist Party, not by a vote of the people. So there you've got a hierarchy. The reason I think our hierarchy is better is, and yes, we have some flaws, is that the president only lasts for 2 terms. Maybe we do need term limits so that congressmen can't live there in the halls of Congress for 20, 30, 40, 50 years. You know, Nancy Pelosi's 82 years old. I think she needs some retirement time. You know, she's got some good ice cream. She needs to open up that freezer, go for it, and leave us alone. Plus, I'm sure she's due for another. This one just bothers me. Rather than being willing to look the age you are, to own the wrinkles that you have, I don't know whether it's Botox or surgeries, but, you know, her hairline and her eyebrows are almost together. That's how concerned that woman is with appearances, and that's too bad. I hope by the time I'm, well, older grandfather age, I'll look like it, because I should. Hopefully I'm thin, not fat, but, you know, we should. So, if you're a cultural Marxist, and I believe that the woke left are cultural Marxist, people like the Squad, or people that simply are bought off, like Gibber and Joe, then you're okay with completely destroying the system. You're okay with stepping on people's rights because you see equality as the goal. Equity as the goal. You don't want equality of opportunity. Instead, you go, well, there's injustice. Well, getting back to that idea of if you're on the left, moving from compassion, you see injustice, of course you want to address it. My problem is with the solutions, not with the idea that we should address inequality. For instance, if somebody is the best at what they do, the best, I don't care what their skin color is, they are the best. And I can give you an example of a very rich man who I have no respect for except as a basketball player, but LeBron James. Best currently in the game. Well, I haven't paid attention for 2 years. Maybe there's somebody new, but probably either first or second best player ever. Well, if we had real equity, then shouldn't we eliminate that? They've set up a meritocracy in sports where the best person, regardless of their politics, regardless of the color of their skin, the best rises to the top. I want that same system. But with that comes freedom, comes responsibility. I think that freedom is the economic engine that allows all that to happen. We're going to go ahead and play our second clip. That's the one from Babylon Bee, yeah.
To achieve success.
Love the Babylon Bee. I am a regular watcher of their videos. I think they're both hilarious and poignant to our time. So we're going to go ahead and play that.
To achieve success and respect in life, you need to learn how to be properly woke. Here is our guide to being woke. Carefully choose your pronouns and then scream them at everyone you meet. Whenever you go to Costco, loudly scream your pronouns in other shoppers' faces. If anyone refuses to celebrate your pronouns, smash a giant box of pretzels over their head and call the manager. Select the most oppressed identity possible.
Test people's loyalty to the woke cause by identifying as a walrus and cancel anyone who doesn't make walrus noises every time they see you. Compare everything to Nazis. Compare this to Nazis, compare that to Nazis. If you can compare it to a Nazi, do it. As long as you're a Democrat, that is. If you're a Republican, compare yourself to a Nazi, because you are one. Hitler. Learn to hate the right people. When directed at the correct targets, hate is great. I love hate. If you are white, first of all, I'm sorry. Second of all, do not have any black friends. This may trick you into thinking that you aren't racist, but you are. Always have extremely low expectations of minorities. You have to be sure to constantly remind people of color that they can never overcome their difficult circumstances without your help, white person. Achieve inner peace by constantly beating yourself up for not doing better. Place a hard yoke and a heavy lifelong burden upon yourself that will never be satisfied and that will never offer any grace, forgiveness, or rest. Easy peasy, and that's pretty much it. Get back to us when you have achieved each and every one of these. By then, we'll have a whole new list of rules for you. And we want to do better too. So leave us a comment letting us know
Let's go ahead and
how
wrap
we
that up.
can be more woke. Namaste.
Love the Babylon Bee. They poke where it matters. They use both comedy and satire. Now, the Babylon Bee wasn't kicked off of Twitter. Political satire in the U.S. was kicked off of social media because in jest, they thought it was funny, and this is why it happened, that they named, Rachel something. She's one of the secretaries. It's a man that is dressed as a woman that's working for Biden. Is it Rachel? Sorry, dear. My wingman that runs all the boards, he can't remember either. Can't remember the woman's name or man's name. And they named this transgender person Woman of the Year. And they publicly did it. And because of that, Babylon Bee was censored by Twitter and kicked off. So they were put in Twitter jail. Now, I say that somewhat in jest, because is Twitter or social media the most important thing? No, but it is the new public square. And the idea that there can't be a diversity of thought, the idea that the left can't handle being laughed at. Dr. Rachel Levine. Yeah, okay, I was right. So, anyway, kind of fun. Love the Babylon Bee. You know, I've got a couple quotes. First one is from John Locke. Now, he is instrumental to how Western culture developed. And he was somebody that all of our founding fathers were very familiar with. He's from England. In a lot of ways, he is one of the fathers of democracy. They took his ideas, I think did an even better job, improved upon them with our Constitution, but implemented a lot of those ideas. Man is absolute lord of his person and his possessions, equal to the greatest and subject to nobody. So this is pre-1776, pre-us even declaring that we were a country. Nothing new. But if we erased history and we discounted what this man had to say simply because of the color of his skin, we would no longer have the opportunity to learn that lesson. I've also got another quote from a guy named William Ophuls. He speaks a lot and wrote a lot about what happened in communist countries when the Soviet Union began to expand, when it began to creep beyond the borders and it took over Czechoslovakia, basically all of Eastern Europe. A spoiled society begins to rot from within. Well, I don't know that they were spoiled over there, because they'd get the carrot and then they'd get the stick, and they were constantly confused. Here, I think we're spoiled. Our poor in this country are doing relatively well. Now, they see it as, well, okay, I went through college. In some cases, that's the new reality. You go through and you get a degree in, say, transgender studies. I don't think there's a whole lot of marketability for that particular degree. So you're very likely poor and you just spent a whole lot of money at your college of choice that didn't believe in freedom. And I don't even want to say doesn't believe in freedom. They don't believe in the idea that the individual can have free speech, because they believe that the freedom of the individual isn't the basis of liberty. They believe that the group is the basis of liberty. And Jordan Peterson talks about this. Academy of Ideas talks about this. One of my favorites, Thomas Sowell, talks about this. And we're going to go ahead and take a break. Final break. This is Eric Rollins, the Constitutionalist, here on 1550 KXEX, the best talk in town. If you like what I'm doing, I won't be on my own all the time. I've done several shows as kind of a learning experience. So those that stuck with me, hopefully I wasn't rambling too much. But if you like what I'm doing, like, subscribe. All of those help move us up in the feed. We're going to go ahead and come back. This is Eric Rollins, the Constitutionalist, here on 1550 KXEX, the best talk in town. And we've been talking about woke ideology. Is there hope? One of the places that I find hope, I'm one of those people that I'll listen to the blues and end up in a better mood, especially if it's the lowdown blues. Another place I find hope is when I listen to the next person we're going to play, J.P. Sears. He typically has a very sarcastic take. Nonetheless, he's a great political commentator and points out the things that should be laughed about. And I find that instead of being all upset about him, if he can laugh about him, I can laugh about him too. So it's a place I find hope. We're going to go ahead and play that clip.
Hello, peasant. We here at the social media headquarters have been getting a lot of fan mail about people loving censorship and wanting more of it. But just in case you're in a place of confusion about the helpfulness of our censorship policies, I'm here to help you think correctly. You see, what you may not realize is that free speech is actually pretty dangerous. It can lead to things like freedom, fair elections, and empowerment. So we've transformed how we run social media to put in place some powerful and exciting policies to provide protection for you from the dangers of free speech. So please join me here to review our updated community guidelines that you'll love to be told to follow. Or else. You have freedom of speech when you repeat what's in line with the narrative that we propagate. And you can rest assured that it's a narrative based on absolute truth, because we're trying to play God over you. You may speak about health conditions when it's done so out of fear, dread, and panic. You may not speak about health conditions in any other light. You may speak about experimental treatments when it's done so out of excitement to get in line to be a guinea pig. You may not speak about experimental treatments when it's in any other light. You're allowed to see only what we want you to see. Right, Jack?
We have very clear policies on
So this is Jack Zuckerberg.
the conduct we enable on the platform.
Incredibly clear. And spoken like
No,
a
Jack
warm,
Dorsey.
loving human, I might add. If you see information published by an enemy of the people before our censors have a chance to erase it, our fact checkers will let you know that you didn't see what you just saw.
Let's go ahead and stop it there.
Trust us.
I would encourage all of you to go to JP Sears, either .com or you can find him on Rumble, YouTube. The man's brilliant. I wish I had a portion, a sliver of his ability to use sarcasm. Nonetheless, that's one of the things that gives me hope. We spend a whole lot of time defining the problem and talking about woke culture. I believe that woke culture, people are about done. that we are starting to see signs that people just want to go on with their lives. They don't want this nonsense. But I think the real path forward is to take responsibility. How much time do you waste? Every day. Could you do one little thing that helps you for 20 minutes? One thing positive. Once you start to do that, could you find one cause? Or could you acknowledge that there is clearly something larger than you? Now, I get the government's larger than you. That would be my choice, because then you lose all your freedoms. And you cultural Marxists, another way of just saying the woke. I guess if you want to give up all your freedoms to the government, but oh, that's right, you believe that the new enlightenment will happen because it will be run by a different set of dictators. But if you take personal responsibility, if you have a purpose, if you're willing to get out there and exercise your freedom, if you're willing to be that person that is willing to defy the group. Authoritarians are fairly fragile. Their governments are fragile, but they're fragile because they don't believe in free speech. So if you tried to have an actual conversation, they'd start off calling you something like a Nazi, or a racist, or a sexist, or you misgendered. All truly the most horrible things possible. Not. So when you take up this path of personal responsibility, you first change yourself, but you become a point of light to those around you. And I'm a big idea on this whole idea of changing who you are so that you can affect your family, so that you can affect your community. It's not enough to just get out there and vote. It's not enough to just kind of go about your lives. If you truly believe in this amazing experiment, because I think that freedom and prosperity, they go hand in hand. The Western world, where they embrace freedom, has the most prosperity in the entire world. Places in Africa where the fastest growing economies are. Fastest growing economies in the entire world are in Africa. And it's because they're embracing freedom. Some amazing things are happening in Africa. In 1952, our infant mortality rate in the Western world, that's where Africa's caught up with. But it's caught up with that in the last, 5 years. They were where we were at in 1952 up till about 5 years ago. That's huge. It's because they embraced freedom. Because when you have people figuring it out for themselves rather than government dictating it, they typically figure it out. Another thing that I thought was really kind of incredible, we talk about the poor, and this is a WEF, World Health Organization stat. Now, I think they're a little shaky, but I don't think they'd lie so much about this stat. The amount that the poor make per day in the last 20 years has doubled. Now, it's still not enough, but more people have come out of poverty in the last 20 years. They're a tremendous sign of hope. I mean, that's really kind of a cool thing. Do you ever hear that in the news? The news has a bias for negative, and it doesn't give you any solutions. And it's completely in bed with the woke culture and the Democrats, because I think the Democrats have largely embraced the woke culture, though. Some of them are starting to wake up, though what we're finding is the ones that are waking up, like Christian Cinema or Tulsi Gabbard, are ones that are now no longer Democrats, because they're like, you've lost your ever-loving mind, and I can't be here anymore. Well, I don't think that all of the world has lost its ever-loving mind. Find your place. Find your freedom. There's hope within that. we can reclaim this amazing country. This is Eric Rollins, the Constitutionalist, here on 1550 KXEX, the best talk in town.